Just a quick heads up that these are adults having adult conversations about things that take place on a show where the adults use a lot of adult language. All this to say there might be some salty language ahead, so please plan accordingly.
You don't need to be loud, Nathan. You just need to be commanding.
With all due respect, it's different for me, Miss Walton. You command every room you walk into.
Oh, hardly. Have you ever been in a room full of football club chairmen?
No.
Every time I walk into one of those meetings, they look at me like some schoolgirl with pigtails.
Oh, you'd look well fit with pigtails.
I do. But I have a secret. I make myself big. Before I go into the room, I find somewhere private. I stand up on my tiptoes, put my arms in the air, and make myself as big as possible to feel my own power. Like this.
Fuck, you're amazing. Let's invade France.
What would Ted Lasso do? That's the question we explore in each episode of this podcast. We take the lessons we learned from Ted Lasso and apply them to the real world through the lens of leadership and positive psychology. My name is Dimple DeBalia.
And I'm Jeff Harry. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we enjoyed making it, and that it helps you discover your own Lasso way and embrace what it means to believe.
Welcome to another week of What Would Ted Lasso Do? This week we are covering Season 2, Episode 5, Rainbow. And this episode was written by Bill Rubel, and I think that's how you pronounce his last name, and directed by Erica Denton. I feel like we're really starting to get into the meat of Season 2 now. Anyway, how are you? Sorry, I just wanted to jump in because I was so excited.
Well, yeah, I just finished the episode and I was like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do, get the rainfall. I don't know the words. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Oh, but the song, the rainbow, there's so much goodness. I felt so happy and giggly after this. I felt like I was experiencing some rom-communism. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying here? Like, oh, this was good from the get-go. And a pivotal moment, apparently, for two individuals, if not more.
Yeah, tell me more.
Well, I mean, we start off the show with Nate walking into the restaurant to get the window table, which I just found that whole experience so fascinating because, you know, he's trying to be confident. He's trying to, like, be assertive. The person's like, you don't really matter. And then at one point he goes, well, I know Roy can't. And then she goes, oh, well, when he requested we can give it to him. And it was just like, it was like all the things. And he's thinking like, what do I need to do? Like, do I need to become famous? Like this is like, I feel like a pivotal moment and probably the first moment where I feel like Nate is the feature of the entire episode. I don't remember the last time it was like that.
Yeah, definitely. So like this episode, I think we've really got two kind of parallel stories going, right? So we've got two people, Nate and Roy, each of who were not coaches last season, but are now kind of stepping into this space, right? Or being asked to step into this space. And they approach it very differently because they have very different personalities. And I think confidence levels, right? Obviously. And so, yeah, Nate's story you're right. Like we haven't seen him, I think, be kind of the center of something like a full episode like this, I think ever, as far as I can remember. And so we get to see a lot of different aspects to his personality and kind of where he's at and what's going on with him. For me, it was a really fascinating look at like two ways of being a leader or like stepping into leadership. And so that was like a big thing for me. But yeah, so that whole scene at the beginning with the restaurant, like my heart just like went out to him. Like it just felt terrible. And it really set up to me like a lot of what happened throughout this episode. And so, you know, we both do a lot of work in the equity, inclusion, belonging field. And For me, this episode was a great like case study in microaggressions. When I teach it, I talk about subtle acts of exclusion.
Yeah.
And it started like right up front. And to your point, like that exact moment where it's like, okay, she says we don't do reservations for the window table. But then when he name drops Roy, it sounds like she'll make an exception for Roy
Yep.
and reserve the window table. And it just, I don't know, that whole thing was just so terrible. But then throughout the episode, we saw moments of this, you know?
And I also just think this idea of like, this is, I don't know what goes on next with Nate, but I've heard rumors or rumblings, right? But maybe, and this is like the moment, right? It only starts with him simply just wanting the window seat, right? And if someone was just polite to him, then maybe he wouldn't, go down this darker path that you kind of feel they're building up to. Yeah, it didn't have to be this way, right? And you can even see it as he's beginning to like practice and he like, overreacts and like raises his voice later on in the episode when he's practicing and doing the role playing. You're like, ugh. You're like, who is that person? Who is this person that's coming out?
I think it really goes to the heart of like what it's like to be a new leader. Like you have basically two settings, right? So you're either kind of like unsure of yourself and, trying to like apologetically doing your job,
Mm-hmm.
or you're like in full on attack mode because you feel like you need to, like how Rebecca says, you don't have to yell. You just need to assert yourself. And so there's that nuance of like, well, how do I assert myself
Yep.
when I already don't, like, I feel really small.
Yep.
The only way I think that I can assert myself is by being loud, and loud equates to big. I thought that was a really beautiful example of that because I think a lot of leaders struggle with that, right? Like, especially new leaders, like we have those two things. So yeah, and so we see that Nate's in this place where he doesn't understand like how to, like he doesn't understand that middle ground yet. Like it's just all or nothing.
And he partly doesn't understand it because he doesn't know who he is, right? He's like not grounded in anything. Yes, he's attached to AFC Richmond, but he also doesn't feel very comfortable in his role there. Like if he was more confident and rooted in one place, that would extend to him being able to ask for things. But the fact that he isn't causes such insecurity, and then it just comes out in very potentially toxic ways.
Yeah. And the other thing about this is like, when we're thinking about subtle acts of exclusion or microaggressions, like I don't like the term microaggressions because I think it causes a lot of people to get defensive. So none of us wants to think that we are, in some way participating in microaggressions against other people, right? Because the term aggression is like built into the word. And so it makes you feel defensive. But subtle acts of exclusion, like I think if we're really honest with ourselves and we look at like our own actions throughout the day and stuff like that, there are moments when this happens and it can be inadvertent. Sometimes it's overt, But the other part of this though is how it's received by the other person. So in Nate's case, there were definitely some really like real kind of acts of exclusion, but there were also ones that were perceived by him. And I think this is another important piece is like the lived experience of the person that's on the receiving end is really everything, right? So even if I don't think I'm doing something wrong, if the other person feels that way and I've made them feel small or whatever, it's going to impact them in some way. And so in this episode, we see like this thing with the restaurant was pretty like overt, but then the free coffee makers, like all the players are getting free coffee makers and he can't get one. It was nothing against him. Like Keeley is, I think, his biggest champion, but these are specifically for the players. But he feels slighted as a result, right? And then the one that really caught me though was when when Nate offers to be the big dog to talk to Isaac, and Ted starts laughing. And Beard realizes right away, like this kid's not like he really thinks that he could do this. And you see that Nate's like embarrassed. He gets up, he walks out. And then the other part of that was interesting was that Ted has given him an indoor whistle, which which I get it. I get it. Like he didn't understand. He didn't have the capacity yet to understand when to blow his whistle. But to me, like, that seems like it would be something Ted would want to teach him rather than like, let me just take away your voice right up front by giving you a whistle that you can't actually blow. Like, you know?
Oh man. I think that's also hard, right, for a leader because Ted doesn't know that he just got excluded from that fancy restaurant, right? He doesn't know all the things that have happened that have led up to this moment. Yeah, he's just being real, and he's just like, yeah, we're going to bring in Roy because seriously, if there was a choice between Roy and Nate, like Nate doesn't have buy-in from Isaac, right? I don't think Nate could have done what Roy did because he's never been on the pitch. So I could understand Ted's stance. Now, having said that, like, how would you know? Because then he scampers off into his room. By the way, still has his own room, which is he should be really happy about, but he probably sees it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, it's like, and then Beard said something about Fanny, and I didn't understand what that was. Did you understand that?
I think it's because when they first came in and they asked what was wrong with Isaac, Nate suggested maybe it was piles. And I think piles is some kind of I don't know if it's like hemorrhoids or I'm not entirely sure what piles are, but
Oh, goodness. Oh, okay.
actually, I totally probably just messed that up. So I don't know what it is, but it's not good.
Right.
So that's the British version of whatever it actually is. And so Beard went through that list of things like words he's not willing to accept. And piles was one of them. And then he went back. So instead of like butt or whatever, he's like, but I will accept Fanny. And so I think he was just like trying to.
He was trying to calm down the mood, right? Yeah. And then we cut to the scene where they're like showing the film, right? That, shows how like angry Isaac is. And I actually kind of understand his frustration, right? They're playing badly. Things seem to have gotten better. And what's interesting about that clip I found was that that's the first time showing in-game play for the whole season. Like we haven't seen that since the penalty kick. And it just shows how like not good they are. But then talk about attunement, they start talking about romantic comedies and communism and everyone is vibing again. And you're like, well, at least the team is like, on the same page. And I think that's the first time the doctor is able, I think, sees Ted, shining in his element and actually being like, hey, we're in a dark forest right now, but it will all work out. We just need to have zero expectations and we just got to let go. And then Isaac's like, you suck. And you're like, well, okay, maybe not that, but okay.
I want to talk about the dark forest for a second. So like what came up for you as you were watching that part?
Which part? The whole thing?
Like his whole speech about the dark forest.
Well, I think it was valid. I think it was, he really does believe the world is like a rom-com where it's going to eventually work itself out, and we have to trust it to a point. And I was actually just having this debate on a heartfelt mastermind that I'm part of. The difference between doing and being. Like, how do you find the balance between doing and being? What he's really pitching is a lot of being. Like, we just need to be ourselves. We just need to trust the moments. We just need to be fully present and look out for one another and things are going to work out. And I believe that to a point. Like, there's a being part. But then there's also the doing part of like, we have to deliver. Maybe it's both the masculine and feminine where we have to like come through. I think he's trying to like smooth it over instead of like getting into the details of like, okay, what do we need to do to actually get out of this dark forest rather than just being like, we're in the dark forest and we'll eventually get out. That's true. But we do have to proactively do something to get out.
Yeah, I like this concept of a dark forest because I think it makes a lot of sense. When we're in the middle of adversity, it's sometimes easy to just get stuck there and feel like that's what it's always going to be like. So I like that analogy to the dark forest is always in the middle. Like we're not going to be here forever. But having said that, to your point with like Isaac's pissed and the team is like demoralized. Like they're not playing well. They recognize they're not playing well. And for me, like the more that his story went on, it felt a little bit on the like starting to move towards the line of toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing, so like it's this idea, like spiritual bypassing is this idea for people who don't know of where we we try to kind of sidestep or avoid any kind of, unresolved and emotional issues or adversities. And we use a lot of platitudes, right? So we'll say things like, well, it is what it is, or this too shall pass. And that's kind of what he was doing, It's all going to work out in the end. It may not work out like you thought it would or you want it to, but it's all going to work out.
Right.
And that's fine. Like there's definitely wisdom in those moments for sure. And we need some of those platitudes from time to time. But I think when you're in the midst of dealing with an issue like that, that kind of optimism, it really just feels forced. And
Yeah.
I think looking at the faces around the room, like that was kind of the reaction that I was seeing too. Like even when he started with the rom-communism, Beard was like, oh.
But they got into it. I mean, they got into it. They started saying all the movies, which was pretty awesome to hear them, and then even Jamie's jumping in.
I loved that last week we were all about all the Christmas movies. And this week there are a ton of rom-coms, that are recognized throughout this whole episode. And that's awesome. Like, I think that one of the articles that I was reading, it was actually really interesting. They were talking about how this idea of masculine and feminine, and that there's something about like a sports kind of show or story, which Ted Lasso originally was kind of, that's what people thought it was, right? And that comes from a genre that's generally like inherently masculine. And that what Ted Lasso has done is they've acknowledged that those like sports type of thing, like shows and movies, owe to romantic comedies, which are often treated as inherently feminine. An interview that Jason Sudeikis did, he talked about like with the show that they were attempting with the show is it's about kindness, it's about forgiveness, it's about empathy, and that it's about the divine feminine. And I was like, that's amazing, And so, I just thought that was such an interesting way to think about it, though, that like, they're looking at in this kind of historically masculine space, they're bringing in what is something that's been considered historically feminine.
Yep.
But using it as a way to like demonstrate these really important points,
Look at how much of his leadership style is divine feminine, right? It's collaborative, it's attunement, it's play. It is like trusting your intuition. He's letting go of expectations in many ways that are not. And that's fascinating that he's doing all this stuff, and he's created this like really safe space where everyone feels comfortable enough to share. I don't know. It's just been awesome. Having said that, what's going to happen? So, yeah. Okay. So anyway, moving on to the Rebecca giggle. There was some Rebecca giggling and I was like, what's this giggling? And then I was like, oh, I had totally forgot about the banter app. And then I was like, oh gosh, she's still on that banter app, still bantering away with someone that she's never seen before. And I'm thinking like nothing of it. I'm thinking it's no big deal. I'm like, whatever, okay. Is it just filler? Are they just talking right now? And it was such an interesting image because her and Keely are talking and then players are coming out of the locker room. And I had never seen, I don't remember the last time I saw a shot like that where I just assumed one of them was going to stop and like interact with them.
I know, me too. Yeah.
Especially Jamie, because I'm like, Jamie's definitely going to like flirt with her or something or try to sleep with her, like something. And he doesn't. And I'm like, what is this? I'm like distracted. Like I can't focus on their conversation about banter and branding and all this stuff because I'm like, what's happening in the background? Like who's going to take the coffee machines?
Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting too. I kind of really got stuck with that. I had to keep rewinding to hear their conversation because I was really focused on the guys behind them too.
Yeah. Did I miss something? I only watched it once. So I was like, did I miss anything crucial there? I just remember it was like branding. It was like a branding with dating argument.
Yeah. So Keely's whole point was that because Rebecca was like, well, people who are really good at their jobs don't have to announce that they're really good at their jobs.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And Keely just takes it in stride. She's like, actually, that's not true anymore. It's about personal branding. And then as they're going through like her trying to figure out how to respond to this person, Keely brings up like, even in that scenario, like you're trying to sell yourself. So like it's still branding even in the dating scenario. So
I just loved that one player, the Jamaican player was just like, can take this and then give it back to you for money? I was like, that's what I was thinking. I was like, yeah, buddy.
So he's actually French Canadian.
Oh, he's French Canadian. Oh,
Yeah.
that's not the Jamaican
Mm-mm.
player.
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, because he's the goalie. He's the goalie, right?
Zarol. Yeah. So that was one of the whole thing on banter with Rebecca and this guy is also a nod to, I think, You've Got Mail.
Oh, okay.
So with You've Got Mail, Kathleen, the woman, Meg Ryan's character, her screen name is Shop Girl, and here we have Boss Girl.
Oh.
Yeah, and then Tom Hanks's character, his screen name is, I think it's like, I don't know what the first letters are, but it's 152. So I don't know if it's NY 152 or whatever. And this is LDN, so London 152. So that was a cute little, callback to that. I love that movie. So adorable.
I always get that movie confused with Sleepless in Seattle. I feel like both of them because it's the same actor. So you're like, dude, like, I don't understand what's going on. Like you could splice the movies together and be like, I can't tell which movie we're talking about until the AOL chat comes up. And then I'm like, I know what this is.
Yeah. And it's funny because there's a lot of Sleepless in Seattle references in this episode as well. But
yeah.
So one thing that I noticed, and I've never noticed this before, when they were in that, like in the room watching the play, and then they start going through all the rom-coms, every single, like, other than J-Lo, every other actor, actress, movie, like everyone was white. And I was like, huh, like I never noticed that before.
I can only remember in Love Actually where there was like an interracial couple. Like,
yeah,
even in that one guy was trying to break them up. So like,
yeah, I found that really interesting. And I think it hit me more just because I was already kind of in that mindset of subtle acts of exclusion for Nate. And so when they started like throwing all those out, I was like, huh, I just have never, I mean, I grew up watching rom-coms, but
yeah.
It's anyway, I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, so I want to talk about Rebecca and Keeley on their mission to help Nate really step into himself, right? Step into that space of assertiveness. I loved that moment of Rebecca and her like fierce warrior pose, like
when she made that noise, I was like, what is that noise? I was like, and people forget she was in Game of Thrones. She was the shame. Like she was so intimidating in that show that I was like, oh my gosh, that is her. Oh my goodness, that's her in Game of Thrones, which I just watched.
Yeah, and for all of our listeners, Jeff just reenacted the pose, so just so you can have that visual.
I breathed it in, and then it was like, I didn't expect that noise to come out. Like, I was like, is that a snake? Like, I'm just trying to understand what she's doing before she goes in. But I might start doing that before I speak anytime from now on.
Yeah, I can see how that would like make you feel like, because she said, I make myself as big as possible, and this is something that I've actually really been working hard at lately, is what I'm calling stepping into my own bigness now, because I think it's something we all struggle with, right? Like it's pretty rare the people who are truly just so confident all the time. And so there is this element of like, what do I have to do to like build myself up to feel big and to be able to step into that space with that level of confidence and feeling like I belong. Like ultimately it comes down to this feeling of belonging, right? Like I belong in this space. I get to be here and I get to take up as much space as I need. And I think that that's like, that is not easy, especially as a woman. And especially as a woman like her in a space of all men, right? Like she said, like, I walk into these football club meetings and, I'm the only woman and they treat me this way. And I believe that, like, we see her as this fierce person who we've seen scheming and doing all these other things. But like, I am sure that in those spaces, like the level of misogyny that must be there, like must be off the charts,
Yeah, must be massive. And remember her old coach, he's such like a misogynist,
Yeah.
It reminds me, and let me know if you felt this way, but Elizabeth Gilbert would always talk about how whenever she was in rooms, she would notice that, there's not a calmness or a relaxation to many of the women in the room. And she was just like, you know what I want to be? I want to be calm in the room to communicate to everybody else that they can be as well in these like tense atmospheres. Have you ever noticed that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that I think really goes to like this idea of mirror neurons, right? Like if I can show up and be calm, we have mirror neurons in our brain that mimic what the people around us are doing. And so
Mm-hmm.
if we show like how we show up is how other people then start to co-regulate with us. It's interesting, I think, especially for women, because like if you are in a room full of men like that, your natural inclination is to make yourself big and powerful and loud so that you are heard in that space. But
Mm-hmm.
but even then you're usually like often not heard, right? And so there was a really great article written by this woman who used to work, I think, in the Obama administration. And she talked about how a lot of times when you're in meetings and it's a mixed group of men and women, and I don't know, maybe like this is changing now, but I know that I definitely experienced this, which was that you will put forth an idea or make a comment or something. And then 5 steps later, a man will make the same point,
Mm.
and then that's what gets recognized, right? And so this woman talked about how in the Obama administration, like she and a lot of the other women like made a pact with each other to amplify each other's voices. And so when they'd be in meetings, yeah, they would like one woman would make a point or whatever, and then several other women around the table would like re-amplify that and make sure that like she got the credit and stuff like that
That's awesome.
until like it was heard that it came from her, and I just thought like, wow, that's really like incredible. And unfortunately it's just kind of where we're at still, I think, and in terms of like the intentionality with which it has to be done. But
And also, I found it also the juxtaposition. I don't know how to say that word right now, where it's Nate asking these two strong, divine feminine women to find his confidence, right? This is a man, and he's being taught by women how to find like his masculine. Like they're helping him find his healthy masculine, which is really fascinating right there. And you're like, okay, I see you. This is complex.
yeah, no, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but that's true.
And then he comes out when he like screams, during the role play, and she's like, whoa, that's a bit too much. And then like, that's this toxic masculine. But also I love this because this is the stuff I do, right? Like role play. This is the role play. Like if I say this all the time, like if you haven't practiced, right, then how do you know how it's going to feel? And I love that they actually play it out. And people are like, oh, well, it's like pretend. It's not real. And he's like, no, it actually you embody it. And then he was able to do it later on. I mean, he did it in a definitely different way than any of us saw him doing it, but he did it nonetheless.
But I also thought it was funny that he was just assuming that Jade would say his name wrong. And so like, he like immediately is like, no, and then he's like, oh yeah, that actually is my name. And so
He had a pre-prep. He was like, I'm ready for a fight. And the person's like, I don't even remember. I don't even know if that person remembered him at first, right?
So Rebecca told him, like, you need to find your own thing that helps you feel that sense of bigness, right? And it's interesting to me that what he chose was berating himself and spitting at himself,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. See, that was a little scary. That was a little scary for me. I was just like, ooh.
Yeah. So tell me what came up for you. Why was it scary? Like,
Well,
what
it
felt
just
scary?
was like, I felt that moment. I mean, again, I don't know what happens next, but I've heard rumblings, but like there's a switch. There's almost like something switched in him. And he's like, this is now my new personality. And even how he comes out with like a certain suaveness, like, it reminds me of what remember in Family Matters with Steve Urkel turns into Stefan. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
But it's that same level of confidence, but there's something in my opinion that's off about it. There's something that is like,
Yeah.
it's still rooted in a toxic, insecure masculinity, but he's and in a very commanding sort of way. Like even how he calls his parents over, I think he does a really good job talking to Jade, right?
Yeah.
He's talking to Jade and he goes, hey, don't get too comfortable over these seats. And then he talks to Jade, really nice. And then he just like,
Yeah.
whistles at his parents. And it's like both okay and and I know he's looking for approval from his father. Like, I get that, man. I felt that look. Oh, that look is the toughest. But in the end, I don't know if he got more approval from his dad or not. I don't know if it looked, maybe he did. I'm not really sure. It felt weird to me. It almost felt like, looking at his suit and how uncomfortable his suit was, that's how it looks for him to put on this new personality, in my opinion. I don't think it fits, but he's going to wear it really tight. And that makes him very stiff as he's trying to be so confident. That's what I got.
No, I agree. I think it's not a good fit. First of all, I think like he's doing everything for the wrong reason, right? Like, everything is about trying to impress his dad.
Yep.
And that is like a no-win situation.
Yep.
When you've like grown up that way. If your dad is not impressed with you, this is not going to be the thing to change it. And,
this one table is going to change it all. Right.
Yeah. But also like, yeah. And I am curious now, like his inclination to like snap and whistle at his parents, and his dad says, we're not dogs, or I'm not a dog, or something like that. And
oh, is that what his dad said?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so like when he walked up, so no, I don't think he impressed his parents or his dad at least. But like, I wonder where that behavior was learned. Like, I wonder if his dad had ever done that,
Now I'm forgetting, what was the banter between his parents behind? Do you remember? Oh, now I'm forgetting. I got to look back at that.
Wait, what do you mean behind?
So he's asking for a table, and then his dad said something like, don't babble on to,
Oh.
And then his mom said something. I forgot what she said.
Right. So,
but that gave a dynamic.
Like, she basically told him to stop, and then like apologized for him, which I think a lot of women do when they have men like this in their lives. But then she she explained that he had been wanting to eat the saganaki all week. So saganaki is this like Greek cheese. So that was like her excuse, was that he basically was hangry. But yeah, no, you're right. I think it did show a lot about the dynamic between them though, right?
Yeah.
So what this also brought up for me though, this part about him spitting at his image. So when I talk about like self-compassion, one of the things that we really try to contrast it against is self-esteem. And so I think like, Rebecca and Keely are trying to build up Nate's self-esteem, his self-confidence. And Kristen Neff, who is like one of the top researchers in the field of self-compassion, she gives a really good explanation for how self-esteem, like we don't want to work towards self-esteem actually, especially with children and stuff like that. We actually want to build the self-compassion muscle rather than the self-esteem, because self-esteem is something that tends to be rooted in judgment.
Yeah.
And so with our esteem, we're, am I a good person or a bad person? And oftentimes, in order to build ourselves up, we will push others down when we're trying to build up our own self-esteem and self-confidence.
Interesting.
Whereas with self-compassion, it's more about the common humanity of it. And it's more about being forgiving and being open and going back to kind of that whole curiosity piece again, right? That was really interesting. And the fact that he would choose to be so hard on himself, because a lot of people who become leaders and who are high performers and things like that, there is this belief that we have that if I'm not hard on myself, like I'm never going to move up and succeed and things like that. And there's just so much research out there around the fact that self-compassion is actually a much better way of operating compared to the perfectionism and being harsh.
Well, also the whole idea of like the self-compassion also raises all boats, right? Like that's the whole strategy of Lasso, of Beard, and last season, when you think of Rebecca, she felt as if she had to be better than her husband, right? And it's that whole supremacy model of like, there can only be one. There can only, like, Nate really believes there's only one person that can be in a position of power right now as I'm in this restaurant. And it's going to be me. Then it's going to be Jade. Then it's going to be my dad. Then it's going to be Jade, this person. And that's just kind of sad, right? And it makes me think, I don't know why it makes me think of this, but I'm feeling the muse visiting me, right? I think of, in a lot of Filipino families, especially, in the Philippines, there's a lot of sons and daughters that like live with their parents until they get married, and they stay really like close to their parents. But as part of that, because sometimes they live with them for a really long time, sometimes until they die, you almost lose the ability to find true self-esteem because it's still connected to you being a kid in that dynamic. And I don't know if Nate lives with his parents or not, but the vibe is that he spends a lot of time with them, right? So it's like hard for him to get out of that dynamic and own who he is separate from that. And who knows what his life was before then, but it just seems like he was the kit guy at AFC Richmond and probably lives with his family and has never had to really assert himself. And now he's having this opportunity to do it at work. But because he's never gotten this chance in any other setting, this is it. Like that, getting that window table is the most important thing in his life, right? And if he doesn't get it, it's going to crush him. And that is maybe how a lot of insecure leaders feel, is if I don't get this one thing to happen, everyone's going to see me as weak. So I got to win on every single front. But then it's just like, while someone that is rooted in both their like divine feminine and healthy masculine and have had many trips, right, and many failures, they're like, we're going to be okay, right? Ted's been here before. He's just like, we're going to be okay. I used to coach a team. They sucked. And then we got better. And then we were awesome. I still believe that's the same way in which it's going to play out here.
Yeah. And I think to your point, like it's not unique to Filipino culture, right? Like I think most cultures that are non-Western operate in that way. And I think it raises a really good point, which is that, there's so much about the people around us that we don't know and we don't see. And so we don't know the baggage that people are carrying into different scenarios and situations. And so that's another place where that going back to curiosity again is so helpful, right? Because the cultural piece of this is huge.
Yeah.
Like for most of us who grew up in other cultures or split cultures, like we carry a lot of this into the room with us, as we try to step into trying to figure out who we are separate from all of that. And so, that's a really interesting point.
And trying not to pass down that historical trauma, like, wait, that is hard for a lot of people. So like, yeah, you're right. Like, so, I mean, I'm trying to have, I'm trying compassion to have more compassion for Nate. But when he spits on himself and then pushes the doors open, right? And then even at the end, he pushes both doors open, right? He's like, I got to make myself as big as possible. And people are cheering him on and being like, hey, you look great. I don't know. Not a good vibe.
Yeah.
I can do the best vibes.
I know, seriously. Okay, let's shift over to Roy's story. I loved this storyline too. So there's this whole aspect of Roy also, we've talked about this already in this season, is in this space of trying to figure himself out, right? Like who is he if he's not a player on this team? And so now he thinks he's a pundit, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like, when Ted's like, why don't you come back and coach? He's like, no, like I'm doing this. I'm good at it. I don't need to, come back and I don't want to come back and coach.
I get retweeted. Look at the value. I get a lot of retweets and a lot of GIFs. That's how I call them too. I call them GIFs. I don't call them GIFs. I get a lot of GIFs.
And that was a joke, I think, from season 1, right? Because I think when Rebecca is talking to Higgins at one point, she says something about a GIF, and he says, I think some people pronounce it GIF, or I don't know. But anyway, like they brought that back again, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, so this whole kind of section is about like Roy stepping in to kind of fix Isaac, get him out of his head. I thought about you as I was watching this yesterday because I was like, oh, this is like your jam, right? Like coming back to like, it's all about play and it's all about remembering like the joy in the thing that you're doing, right? And I think most all of us forget that. Well, I shouldn't say you because you're really good about it. But like, I know for me, I have stepped so far away from that in a lot of ways. And like just that joy of being out there and doing the thing you love. And I loved that was his whole thing to Isaac. Like you used to play this for fun, like go out there and play it for fun. And it just knocks him like right out of his head and into his body and into the game. And oh my gosh.
Yes. This part I love about Isaac because
as we've talked about before, right? My whole org is rediscover your play, right? Like that's the answer to a majority of our, the questions that we seek. And just having Roy, you know, put him in there, him feeling like, oh, I'm just with all these scrubs, what am I going to get out of this? And then they just take him from the beginning. And then he's just like, I don't see the point of this. And he's like, just go fucking have fun, you know, and reminding him not only that he gets to play, but that he actually gets to play for a living. Like he gets paid to play the game he loved to play when he was a kid, that he would play, for 12 hours a day, and his parents had to scream for him to come in. And now he does this for a job, right? And just that, you could then see the creativity of Isaac as he does the shoulder pass, and then he does this nice little kip later on. And then the one that I love the most was when he gets the pass, and talk about a two-man, he lets the ball go through his legs, a really cool Mbappe type move, so that the girl that Ted usually plays soccer with can score. And then he polishes her shoe, and you're like, dude, like this is why I play, because this is just so much fun. And I would play even if I wasn't getting paid. But guess what? I actually also get paid to do this.
I don't think that is the girl that Ted usually plays with, though.
Oh, is that? Are you sure? I think it is.
I'd have to go back and look, but I don't think it is the same person.
Oh, okay.
Because I think we're in a different part of town now too, right? So I don't know. I didn't think it was her, but I did like that part. I thought that was really cute when especially because she was the one who did the trash talking at the beginning, when she tells Roy that Roy on one leg is probably better than this fool on two legs. And so the fact that they kind of came together, I thought was really cute. But, that all leads to like Roy's big epiphany when he's back in the pundit seat.
Yeah.
And, they're asking him like, oh, you probably don't miss the cold. You probably don't, and he really, and especially because they're like laughing about like this new warm up routine. And we see Isaac just like making everyone laugh. And like he's embodied that spirit of play again. And it's made the team relaxed. Everyone's just kind of like enjoying it together. And their question is, well, what's gotten into him? Like he's been a shell of himself lately. What's gotten into him? And Roy realizes like, oh, I did that. Like I did that. And actually it is what I want to do. And so, yeah, I love that moment where he just has that epiphany. He gets up and it's like so awkward with him trying to take off his mic. And that's like a nice little callback to Sleepless in Seattle where he says, Jeff, I have to go, and then that whole montage of him trying to actually get to the stadium is so funny. What was interesting is, so we know from, and this was in one of the articles that I read, that, Higgins, his ringtone is Rainbow for his wife, right? Which is really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And he explains to Rebecca that it's their song because he heard it the very first time that he met her, like at the moment that he met her, right?
Mm.
And now we have Roy, who's like his love affair with coaching and, this new season or role in his life. It also starts with the song Rainbow. And so I love that they called it back. And first of all, just such an incredible song as it is. But once again, as Ted Lasso does, the way that they have placed the music in throughout this particular episode, or like the scenes that match the music. And so you start off with Rainbow, and then as it's going through, like it starts to slow down when he opens the cab door and he's like waiting. So the music slows down again. And then like all through like the parts where they're running, it's getting faster.
Mm-hmm.
But the part that I really love is where they get to the point of, there's a verse in there. It says, have you seen her dressed in blue? And they cut to Higgins' wife and she's dressed head to toe in blue.
Oh.
And then a few minutes later, the verse is, have you seen her dressed in gold? And they cut to Keely and she's dressed in gold. And I'm just like, I love it. And then at the end, the music gets all warped, right? And that's right as Nate realizes like, oh, Roy's joining the coaching staff. And he sees that Ted's actually really happy, right? And you see the music get all kind of distorted and that. And so again, just such a really beautiful job of how they did that.
Yeah, it gets very Cape Fear near the end. There's like a Cape Fear type vibe to it, and you're like, what is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I just also just the whole build up to it, because talk about play, right?
Yeah.
So Isaac goes and plays this game, right? And then he goes and plays with his, teammates, and talk about attunement. That is the biggest level of attunement, where has to memorize all of their handshakes, and he's like come up with all of these, which means like he's been learning this for a while, right?
Yeah.
So I just love that moment. But I also loved, and this is not said enough, but Roy basically summarized of sports, TV, and radio, and everything about it, and how ridiculous it is, because it really is about them just complaining, to talk, guessing what might happen, even though they have no idea what happens. Then in the middle, then talking about why didn't they do what I said they were going to do, right? Like, and so detached from the game, but trying to pretend as if they're part of the game, even though they really are not, right? They're just not anymore, And he's like, why would I sit here, and even though this is my zone of excellence, like I could do this for the rest of my life, there's no way I'm going to do this. And then I loved when he did get up and he like looked the person in the eye. And was the running from When Harry Met Sally? Because that was the vibe I was getting.
Yeah.
Because they did the When Harry Met Sally interviews with the couple.
Yeah.
They were like, and I was like, I love When Harry Met Sally. It's one of my favorite movies. And I love that they're, and then we met again, and it was just like, and it was love. It was love. Again, attunement, right?
And they bring in the Titanic into that speech too, like at the very end. Yeah.
But the attunement, them repeating themselves, and then you see Higgins with his wife, and they look at each other, and you're like, oh my goodness, they looked at each other like it's the first time they've seen each other. It was just such a good vibe, And then Roy is like getting injured on the way. Look what he has to do. He has to shed his tie. He has to shed his suit. He breaks his knee again. He has to give all that cash to get there. Then he has to give away his watch, and he's still like, he's shedding all the stuff just so he can get to the pitch. And then he has to still buy a ticket, can't buy a ticket because he gave away all of his money, right?
Well, he doesn't have to buy a ticket. Ted leaves him a ticket every week.
Right. There's a ticket waiting for him, right? But he has to walk over there and ask for Reba, and then even when he like growls at the kid is like, yeah, you're back. Like, even the kid understands the significance. He understands it more than the security guards that won't let him in, right?
Yeah. But I loved that moment when he walks onto the pitch again.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
And the whole stadium notices. And it's just like, I loved
And they start
that.
singing the song.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Cat, yeah. Roy Cat.
Yeah. It was so amazing.
He's fucking where? Roy Cat. And it's like, he really is here and there and everywhere. Like, he's showed up. And when he walks up, I thought, I almost got a Shawshank Redemption vibe. I don't know if you remember at the end of Shawshank Redemption with Morgan Freeman, and I forgot the other guy's name, but when they meet at the beach, at the end, and it's like such a classic scene of like seeing each other. He looks right at him. And I was like, oh my goodness, is getting these vibes. But then of course the Jerry Maguire thing came out. It was just like, you had me at coach. And I was like, let's go.
Well, and did you see Beard's reaction when he says that?
No. What did he say?
Beard just like is like, oh, like it's so funny. It's so funny. But yeah, so we've got Jerry Maguire there. And even the speech that Ted gives to Roy, like after the whole thing with Isaac, he quotes When Harry Met Sally, Jerry Maguire, Notting Hill, and that's just the first like part of it. And then at the end, he ends with Princess Bride with the As You Wish. And so I thought that was very clever. Yeah, it was very clever.
Oh, wow. I didn't even pick up on that. And talk about how clever the writing is as well. You don't know a lot of times where the advice is going to come from. So they're literally having those falafels. And then that guy's like, on my last day of medical school, and is like, oh, this is going to be a good story. And it was just like, whoa, this dude's dropping knowledge. And he's like, and this is why I make the best falafel, right? It's just like, oh, this is so interesting. And then of course, Roy's like, well, now this place is ruined,
Yeah. But even at the falafel shop, I know that was funny. What's interesting is the guy references fathers and sons again. So we've already talked about it like towards the beginning of the season that there's just a lot of references to fathers and sons. And so we see like him refer to like Ted and Roy being father and son. And he says, no, I used to be his coach. And he says, well, it's the same thing, right? And so you've got Roy and Ted in that space of father and son, but then you've got Nate actually dealing with his father. And so again, that theme of fathers and sons popping up, which I thought was really interesting. I just want to talk briefly about Ted. And so I feel like in this episode, we're just seeing more of Ted kind of unraveling, you know? And so there was, the scene with the doctor in the hallway, and he's just so like over the top Ted, right? Like everything she says, he's got a joke.
Yeah, like super awkward.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And he even quotes like the lyrics from Under Pressure when she asks him how he's doing. And so he's not saying it, but like she sees right through it, which I really appreciate. And yeah, and so it just feels like there's something a little bit off with him, throughout the episode. And the fact that he, like I said, didn't recognize, like Nate was serious about wanting to like step in and talk to Isaac, things like that, that I feel like he in the past would have been a lot more attuned to, where he would have picked up on that stuff. And so I think that he's still kind of out of sorts, and that something is just not like he's starting to unravel a little bit.
I see that a little bit, but I also see he's almost playing a secondary role throughout the entire show now in many ways. Like I think about the Christmas special, the Christmas episode, and like, Isaac's running the Santa thing, right? Or he defers a lot now. Like he brought in Roy to solve this issue, right? And he's trusting his players more to actually help him out. At least he's asking for help. I think the one thing he's just kind of scared to do though is like to talk to the doctor. He's just like, well, why don't you just take the door off if your door's open all the time? Well, that would reduce the privacy, but okay. Like,
yeah, like what? Like, which is funny because he said the same thing to the press. My door's always open to you, And so it's interesting. I just thought about that, but like, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I don't see as much of him unraveling as I see him just having no idea what to do. But having said the fact that he has no idea what to do, he reaches out to Roy in this episode. You're like, okay, well, at least he's trying to make progress, as best as he can in his folksy way. But I think a lot of those strategies that worked in the first season are not working now. And this is why it's so interesting, the dynamic of the locker room drastically changing with Roy now there, because now you have a healthy masculine to balance the divine feminine, and they can probably start doing much better that way because there's a little edge to it as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where it's going to be interesting what role Nate's going to play in all of this, right? So,
yeah, for sure.
And that was the weird thing at the end where it's just like he sees Roy as a threat, and I was like, why is Nate seeing Roy as a threat? Like, y'all aren't on the same level. Like y'all aren't like, you do different things for the club. So I don't understand. But Nate sees him as like a direct threat to his assistant manager job, and is like, that also is quite fascinating that he sees it that way. I was like,
but I feel like that's a pretty human reaction, because especially if you already are feeling insecure and small, and then you have someone of Roy's stature come in, I think it is going to make you feel like threatened and, start to question like if anyone's going to see your value. And the reality is that Nate he's strategic. Like he understands strategy. Like Roy's a good player and he understands the mindset of the player. But when it comes to actual strategy, like Nate actually has a gift for this, which is why they promoted him. But I can see how in that moment, like, yeah, like I feel like if I was in that position, I definitely would be like, well, what the fuck is happening? Like, and am I still going to have a job, or like, what's my role going to be? And so I think, I don't know, to me, like it feels like a pretty human reaction, but I agree, like they play very different roles and they're going to play very different roles. But I think in the moment, it's hard to remember that sometimes. All right. So just a few little pop culture references. So when Ted sets his alarm for PM instead of AM and he comes out and Beard says, you got ready pretty quick. And he says that a man should only take as long as the song Easy Lover by Phil Collins and Philip Bailey to get ready. And so I thought that was really funny. And just a little fun fact. So Philip Bailey used to live in my neighborhood. And so I was actually friends with his daughter in elementary school.
What?
I know. So random. And then the photos at the kebab shop. I thought that was actually really funny. And this one I did pause because I couldn't read them fast enough. But so you have George Wendt on the furthest left side, and he is the real life uncle of Jason Sudeikis, for people who don't know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he used to be on the show Cheers, and we know that they've referenced Cheers in other parts of the show in the past. But his photo says, "Cheers to the best kebab in town." And then in the middle, you have Roy, and his just says, "Yum, Roy Kent." And then on the furthest right-hand side, you have Marcus Mumford. And so, as we know, Marcus Mumford has done a lot of the music on the show. He's a really good friend of Jason Sudeikis. And his portrait says, "Your doner kebab has no right to be this good." I just thought that was really funny. Yeah. And then we talked about a lot of the kind of rom-com references. Yeah. Another, I think, really interesting and layered episode. Lots of stuff, a lot more than I realized.
That was the first time I realized, like, oh, the Rebecca Ted thing is potentially going to happen. All right. Oh, I didn't realize this was going down. Oh, is this going down? Okay. I see you. So yeah, that was interesting, to say the least. So I'm here for that. I'm so here for that.
Yeah.
So what are you taking away from this episode?
I think my biggest takeaway from this episode is just always coming back to finding the joy and the play in what you're doing. Because again, I think as we grow up, that's the part that falls away first. And we get into this space of what it means to be, quote unquote, an adult, a professional. And I love the idea of just bringing play back into what I'm doing and finding that joy that I used to find when I was younger,
I'm taking away the self-compassion piece that you mentioned. Building self-compassion as opposed to building self-esteem. That I just found really fascinating, because the self-compassion space definitely then feels more of a we over me type space, right? And then it's this whole idea of like raising all boats, right? And I'm going this week to run some workshops around like belonging, right? And connection. And in order for me probably to run them really well, I'm going to have a certain level of self-compassion for myself as I'm putting these together, and not fall victim to perfection, as I see play is the opposite of perfection. And I actually see play as like the way in which to dismantle like supremacy, right? Dismantle patriarchy is embracing that curious, play-oriented adventure.
Well, thank you so much. As always, this was fun. And I really appreciate you. And I really look forward to the next episode. So,
the next episode. So do I. Thanks so much for this. Ooh,
yeah,
let's go.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Talk to you later. Thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of What Would Ted Lasso Do? If you got any nuggets of Ted Lasso wisdom from this episode, try them out in your life and let us know what happens at WWTLD Podcast on Instagram or on our website, www.tldpodcast.com, where you'll also find a full transcript of the show. We love hearing what other Ted heads took away from the episode, or details or perspectives that we might have missed.
And if you do like the show, please subscribe and head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating. Every rating helps us get our show in front of more listeners. To that end, we'd also ask if you enjoy the show, please share it with your friends, loved ones, randos on the street. You get it.
Thank you to the team at Podify for producing our show, to Kajal Dabalia for all our visuals and graphics, and to Kenzie Slato for our theme song. And most of all, thank you to all of you for listening.
Ted Lasso could simply just be another show to binge watch, or if we challenge ourselves to consistently ask the question, what would Ted Lasso do? It could change the trajectory of your life. It has for us.
So join us again next time as we explore another episode and ask ourselves, what would Ted Lasso do?